Okay, let's unpack this Pontius Pilate. He's more than just a name you hear in an ancient story, right?
Absolutely. There's a real historical figure there and a lot of debate surrounding him.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, the history, the archaeology around Pilate. We're using this fantastic ebook as a guide, Pontius Pilate, the Trial That Changed the World. It's courtesy of the Next Republic Initiative.
And I have to say, the illustrations in it are really exceptional. They really help bring that whole period to life. Makes it much more engaging than just text.
Totally agree. So the plan is to look beyond just the familiar trial narrative and dig into the actual evidence for Pilate's existence, his power, his context in Roman Judea.
Yeah, basically piecing together the historical Pilate using what archaeology and other ancient texts tell us as presented in the ebook.
So first things first, establishing he was actually real. Because for such a famous name, you sometimes wonder, right?
You do, but the evidence is pretty strong. It's not just legend. We have tangible proof.
Okay, so where do we start? What's the big piece of evidence?
Well, the absolute cornerstone has to be the stone of Pilate, found in Caesarea Maritima.
Ah, yes, the one they found used as, like, a step in an old theater. Amazing how history gets reused.
Exactly. Crazy, isn't it? But the inscription, even though it's broken, is incredibly significant.
What does it actually say?
It reads, Dis Augustus Tiberium Pontius Pilatus, prefectus Judaeae fecit dedicavit.
Okay, break that down for us.
So you've got his name, Pontius Pilate. You've got his official title, prefect of Judea. That's a big deal. Tells us his job.
Prefect, right. Not procurator, that came later.
That's a common point of confusion, yeah. Tacitus uses procurator later, but prefect seems correct for Pilate's time. And the inscription links him directly to Emperor Tiberius through this Tiberium he dedicated.
At Tiberium? Is that some kind of building?
Probably, yeah. Maybe a temple or monument dedicated to Tiberius. Scholars still debate the exact meaning, but the stone itself, it's undeniable proof. Pilate existed, held this specific office under this specific emperor.
Wow. Okay, so a stone carving. Hard evidence. What else? The ebook mentioned coins, too.
It did. Pilate minted his own bronze coins, these little Pruta coins. He did this for 3 years, starting around 29 CE.
What's significant about them, apart from, being actual money from his time?
Well, the inscriptions reference Tiberius and initially his mother Livia, too. But what's really interesting, potentially controversial, is the imagery.
How so?
He used Roman religious symbols, the cimpullum, which is like a ladle used in sacrifices, and the laterus, an augur's staff.
On coins circulating in Judea, with a population sensitive about graven images and Roman pagan symbols.
Exactly. It raises big questions. Was it deliberate provocation, a display of Roman power, or just maybe administrative clumsiness, not really thinking about local feelings?
Yeah, you can see how that might cause friction. It hints at the dynamics of his rule.
It certainly does. It's a little window into the complexities he was navigating, or perhaps creating.
Okay, stone, coins. Wasn't there a ring, too, found at Herodium?
Yes, a copper alloy ring, quite simple, stamped with the name Pilato in Greek letters.
Pilato. Close enough. Could it belong to him?
Well, the name Pilate wasn't super common then, so the scholarly thinking is, yeah, it probably belonged either to the man himself or someone high up in his administration, maybe a freedman or a soldier. Another tangible link.
Incredible. So the ground itself is giving us evidence. What about written sources from around that time? Besides the Gospels, the ebook mentions others, right?
Definitely. And they give different perspectives, often quite critical ones. Philo of Alexandria is one.
The Jewish philosopher, what did he say?
He wrote about an incident where Pilate put up these shields in Jerusalem, in Herod's palace. They didn't have images, but they were inscribed with the emperor's name, dedicated to Tiberius.
And that caused trouble.
Huge trouble. A delegation of Jews, including Herod's sons, protested vehemently because it was seen as violating their traditions against any kind of imperial symbols in the Holy City. Philo uses this incident to paint Pilate very negatively.
How negative?
He calls him things like inflexible, stubborn, and cruel. Really lays into him.
But as the ebook points out, Philo had his own agenda, didn't he? He was defending Jewish rights and customs against Roman actions.
Precisely. Philo's writing is powerful. It likely reflects real tensions, but you have to consider his rhetorical purpose. He's making a case. His portrayal might be, let's say, heightened.
Okay, so Philo gives us one pretty harsh view. Who else wrote about him? Josephus, I assume. He wrote about everything back then.
Flavius Josephus, yeah. our main source for Jewish history of that era. He writes later in the 1st century in his books Jewish War and Jewish Antiquities.
And he mentions Pilate quite a bit.
Oh yeah. He covers several incidents. The introduction of Roman standards, flags with imperial images into Jerusalem under cover of night, which also caused massive protests.
Another clash over symbols. Seems like a theme.
Definitely. Josephus also describes a controversial aqueduct project Pilate undertook to bring water to Jerusalem.
What was controversial about an aqueduct? Sounds useful.
The funding? Josephus says Pilate used money taken from the temple treasury, the Korban. That, as you can imagine, did not go down well. There were protests, and Pilate suppressed them forcefully.
Okay, so Josephus shows him being quite heavy-handed too.
He does, yes, but perhaps slightly less purely negative than Philo. Josephus portrays him as maybe stubborn, certainly willing to use force to maintain Roman order, but perhaps more pragmatic, dealing with difficult situations, maybe clumsily.
And Josephus is also where we get that mention of Jesus, the famous Testimonium Flavianum.
Correct. That passage is hugely debated by scholars regarding its original wording, how much might have been added later by Christian scribes.
Right.
But most scholars think the core is authentic Josephus, that he mentioned Jesus as a wise man, a performer of surprising deeds who gained a following and was crucified under Pontius Pilate.
And didn't Josephus also mention James?
Yes, in another passage widely accepted as genuine, he refers to the execution of James, the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. Another important historical anchor.
Okay, so Jewish sources give us these, well, often critical views. What about a Roman source? Did any Romans write about Pilate?
Yes, the historian Tacitus, writing in the early 2nd century in his Annals.
What does Tacitus say?
He's discussing Emperor Nero's persecution of Christians in Rome, and to explain who Christians were, he mentions their founder, Christ. He says Christ suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate.
Procurator, again, interesting. But he confirms the key fact.
He confirms the execution under Tiberius by Pilate. It's a brief mention, but coming from a non-Christian Roman historian, it's considered very strong, independent evidence. Almost everyone accepts this passage as authentic.
Wow. Okay, so pulling all that together, the stone, the coins, the ring, Philo, Josephus, Tacitus, it's clear Pilate was a real historical figure, a Roman official with significant power in Judea.
Absolutely. No serious historian doubts his existence. The question is more about his character and how he governed.
Let's talk about that governance. He was prefect, appointed around 26 CE. What did that job actually involve? What were his powers?
As prefect of Judea, his main job was to keep the peace, the Pax Romana, maintain law and order. This meant he commanded the auxiliary troops stationed there.
It's a military command.
Yes. And crucially, he administered justice. This included the power of life and death, the auxius gladii, or right of the sword, capital punishment.
Which becomes very relevant later, obviously.
Extremely relevant. He also oversaw finances, tax collection, that sort of thing. But he wasn't the top dog in the region. He answered to the Roman legate based in Syria and ultimately to the emperor in Rome.
It sounds like a really challenging post. Trying to impose Roman rule on a place like Judea with its unique religious identity and history of independence.
Hugely challenging, and you see that reflected in the sources. The Jewish sources, as we saw, paint him as harsh, insensitive. The Gospels, particularly Luke and John, sometimes show him as more hesitant, maybe seeing Jesus as innocent but giving into pressure.
So how do historians today reconcile those different pictures? What's the sort of consensus view?
I'd say many historians see him less as exceptionally cruel and more as a typical Roman governor focused squarely on maintaining Roman authority and stability in a notoriously difficult province. His primary concern would have been preventing any kind of uprising or challenge to Rome.
So the clashes over symbols, the use of force against protests, that fits the picture of someone prioritizing Roman control above all else.
Exactly. He needed to keep things quiet. From Rome's perspective, that was his job. The potentially more sympathetic portrayal in parts of the Gospels might reflect a later Christian tendency to shift the blame for Jesus' death away from the Romans and more towards the Jewish authorities. An apologetic motive, perhaps.
And he had to work with the local Jewish leadership, right? Like the high priest Caiaphas. How did that relationship work?
It seems they had a working relationship, however uneasy. Caiaphas remained high priest throughout Pilate's entire prefecture, which was unusually long. That suggests they found some way to cooperate, or at least coexist. Roman governors often relied on local elites to help manage the province.
So, a complex political situation. And His time as prefect ended pretty abruptly, didn't it, after another incident?
Yes, Josephus tells us about an incident involving the Samaritans. Pilate violently suppressed a gathering of Samaritans on Mount Gerizim, who were apparently searching for sacred vessels hidden by Moses.
And that was the final straw.
It seems so. The Samaritans complained to Vitellius, the Roman legate of Syria, Pilate's superior. Vitellius ordered Pilate back to Rome to answer for his actions before Emperor Tiberius.
Did he make it? Did Tiberius judge him?
No, Tiberius actually died while Pilate was en route, so what happened to Pilate after that? We don't really know for sure. History kind of loses track of him. There are later legends, some say he was exiled or committed suicide, others even claim he eventually converted to Christianity, but there's no solid historical evidence for any of that. His fate remains unknown.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've established the historical Pilate, his job, his context. Now let's turn to the event he's most famous for, the trial of Jesus, which, as the ebook title says, changed the world.
Right, and for this, the Gospels are our main source of information, providing the most detailed narrative. But again, we have to remember they were written decades later by followers of Jesus with specific theological goals.
They don't all tell the story exactly the same way, do they?
No, there are variations in details and emphasis between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But the core sequence involving the Jewish authorities arresting Jesus and bringing him to Pilate for judgment is consistent.
One key thing seems to be the nature of the charges. It shifts, doesn't it? From religious issues before the Jewish council to political ones before Pilate.
That's crucial. Before the Sanhedrin, the issues seem to revolve around claims that could be seen as blasphemy, challenging religious authority, maybe his claims about the temple or his own identity.
But blasphemy wasn't really a Roman crime, was it? Pilate wouldn't care about that.
Exactly. Rome generally let provinces handle their own religious matters, unless they caused public disorder. For Pilate to get involved, especially to consider execution, the charge needed to be political, a threat to Roman rule.
So the accusation becomes
Sedition, treason. The charge that Jesus claimed to be king of the Jews, that's a direct challenge to Caesar's authority. That's something a Roman governor absolutely had to deal with.
Which leads us to that inscription on the cross, the Titulus Crucis.
Yeah.
INRI.
Yes. Isus Nazarenus Rex Idiorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Putting the charge publicly on the cross was standard Roman practice for executions, especially for treason or rebellion.
And it was written in multiple languages, right? Hebrew, Latin, Greek.
According to the Gospel of John, yes. To ensure everyone understood the reason for the execution, this man supposedly challenged Roman authority by claiming kingship, and this is the price. It's a stark display of Roman power.
So considering all this Pilate's job to keep order, the charge of sedition, the political volatility, especially around Passover, how should we understand Pilate's actions in the trial? Was he the hesitant figure trying to release Jesus, as John depicts him?
Well, that portrayal is powerful, but looking at it from a Roman governor's perspective, faced with a potential popular leader, acclaimed by some as a king, brought by the local authorities who framed him as a political threat during a tense festival time.
He might have just seen it as neutralize the threat.
It's very possible. Execution for sedition, real or perceived, was a standard tool in the Roman provincial toolkit. He might have seen Jesus as just another potential troublemaker, another disturbance to the Pax Romana that needed to be decisively put down. The hesitation might be more a feature of the gospel narrative than historical reality. He was likely acting as a Roman official would be expected to act in that situation.
It makes the whole event feel much more grounded in the political realities of the time. And the ebook touches on this idea too, that it wasn't just Pilate. There's a shared responsibility, maybe.
That's a key takeaway. While Pilate, as the Roman authority, gave the final order and his soldiers carried out the crucifixion, the process was initiated by the Jewish leadership who arrested Jesus and presented him to Pilate with accusations framed in a way that demanded Roman attention. It was an intersection of local conflicts and imperial power.
It really is such a complex moment in history. And looking at all these pieces, the archaeology, the different texts, the political context, gives you a much fuller picture than just one account alone.
Absolutely. And again, seeing it visualized like in the ebook Pontius Pilate, the trial that changed the world, really helps synthesize all these different strands of evidence.
Yeah, it does. So just to recap quickly, we've seen there's solid historical and archaeological proof that Pilate existed and was the Roman prefect of Judea.
We've looked at the complexities of his governance, the clashes, the need to maintain Roman order in a very difficult province.
And we've contextualized the trial of Jesus within that Roman legal and political framework, focusing on the charge of sedition. And seriously, check out that ebook from Next Republic if you want to see this history come alive visually.
It really does tie it all together, which, leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to ponder.
Okay.
Why Pontius Pilate? Why does this one Roman governor out of so many across the empire remain so lodged in our collective consciousness almost 2,000 years later?
Good question.
Is it just because of his role in that one specific trial? Or is it something about the ambiguity, the conflicting accounts, the questions about his motives? Is it that intersection of raw imperial power and world-changing religious events?
Or maybe just the sheer weight of the consequences that flowed from his decision, or his perceived decision.
Perhaps. It's worth thinking about how understanding the historical context, the archaeology, the political pressures we've talked about today, how does that change or deepen your understanding of this figure who stood at such a pivotal moment in history? Something to reflect on.